Welcome and thanks for joining us for Global Data Vault's January webinar. I'm Trista Perot, Marketing Director for Global Data Vault, and I'm kicking off this next episode in our series that takes us back to the basics with a topic that's actually anything but basic, ransomware and how to avoid it. Before we jump into the complexities of that, though, we do want to share some very exciting news along the lines of the whole New Year, New You theme. Looks a little different to you today. That's because we were recently acquired by DataPrize. DataPrize, if you're unfamiliar, delivers best-in-class managed cybersecurity, disaster recovery as a service, managed infrastructure, and managed end-user services, all of which transform business, enhance user experience, and eliminate today's risks. DataPrize believes that technology should enable clients to be the absolute best at what they do, and this commitment to client success is why DataPrize is recognized as the premier strategic managed service and security partner to CIOs and IT leaders across the United States. We at Global Data Vault believe it to be a perfect fit and are thrilled to be part of the more than 300 amazing and talented people in the DataPrize family that support well over 1,000 customers. And us, as I see some of them joining us on the webinar today. So welcome, DataPrize, and welcome to all of our other attendees as well. So if you're interested about DataPrize, you can certainly learn more about them at dataprize.com. Enough about us. Let's talk about you and how you can avoid ransomware. Today, we're sharing our recent client experiences with ransomware, how these companies knew they were attacked, what the common attack strategies were, and how we were able to help them. Based on these experiences, we'll share the steps that you can take to avoid becoming a victim of ransomware. And if you are a victim of ransomware, the steps you should take immediately following an attack. Also, we'll provide a DR plan template and a ransomware checklist to everyone who's participating in the webinar today. It's an immensely important topic, so if you need to step out or need to rewind to see it again, we will make it available for replay on our YouTube channel. So with that, let me get out of the way and introduce our team. Invisible but moderating the session and available to answer questions in chat, we have both Brian Brignac and Leslie Ferris from our sales department. And as for our speakers today, we have Kelly Colwell, our service delivery manager, and Stephen New, our operations director. Let's get rolling.
Cool. Thanks, Trista. As everybody knows, ransomware is serious. It's more prevalent today than ever. As we can see here, the number of ransomware attacks nearly doubled in the first half of 2021. And they say that attacks happen about every 11 seconds. And whether you know it or not, your firewalls, your perimeters, your businesses are constantly being bombarded. Typically, what happens with ransomware is they ask for ransom, right? That's where it gets its name. But what people don't understand is how great the cost can be for these incidents. Anywhere from 5 to 200,000 in 2020, and then in 2021 we've seen $40 million is the largest ransom, and those are astronomical numbers, right? Obviously, it's going to depend on a little bit about the size of your organization and what the hackers think they can extract and gain from you. But there's a lot of underlying costs that people don't always take into consideration, such as reputation, lost employee productivity, any kind of other insurance, or just plain old downtime costs with the effect of you losing money as a result of the attack. So let's look at how you know you've been hit. Typically, you'll get a ransom request. You'll see something on a screen. Somebody will send you an email saying, yep, you've been hit. Here's what your instructions are. We'll contact you in 72 hours for the money, and that's usually in something like Bitcoin. You'll start getting alerts on systems. We expect to see an alert here or there, but if all of your systems suddenly reporting is offline, that might be a good indicator that something else is going on. One thing that's pretty common is not being able to log into resources such as your computers, your servers, systems, firewalls. People can't get on the internet because DNS is down. People are unable to log into their virtual environments to see what's going on. A lot of that really gets attacked and restricted from use, which obviously creates bigger problems, and that's the whole point. Recently, we have had a few customers be hit, and it's been similar variants. We've seen a lot of Conti in the past few months, and it's been pretty much the same attack surface where we have seen that somebody has gained access to a customer's domain admin credentials or some type of elevated credentials. They've done this through spear phishing attempts, through malicious websites, just the plain old, hey, click on me type attacks. Once they have those domain admin credentials, software attackers were able to gain access to the backup servers because they were on the domain, and then they were able to grab a hold of their backup files and their cloud backups. So in addition to compromising everything in the production environment, they use this method to get backup files, cloud backups, etc., effectively meaning they couldn't restore their data. These customers were varied in type. So we had an oil and gas company, we had an accounting firm, and we had a mechanical contractor of a sort, obviously being very respectful of their identities, but it doesn't matter who you are, is my point. So we were able to help them. So Stephen, we talked about the common factor, and that was they sort of hit the same way and they use the same credentials. Can you tell us a little bit about how that worked?
Yeah. So what we're seeing is we're seeing domain administrator accounts being breached, we're going to call it. And the attackers come in using the domain administrator accounts, and then they log in and basically essentially run scripts across your network that goes in and encrypts everything. So these scripts go in and they are smart enough to detect if you are running backups, and they are able to, basically the issue that we're running across is if the threat cannot encrypt the data or cannot read it, it will delete the file. That's by default. So what we're seeing goes in and tries to read files, it can't encrypt it, and then delete your data. So what we're seeing on the Veeam side is the actual backup data, since they can't encrypt it, is being deleted from the repositories.
Yeah, that's pretty dangerous stuff, because obviously if they could recover their data, they wouldn't need to pay the ransom. So they're eliminating that. As far as preventative measures go, there are a few things that we can do with that. And Stephen, let's walk through these. So you talked about domain admin credentials. What are some things that we can do to prevent that?
Well, first of all, you want to limit the use of your domain admin privileges. Make sure that you do an audit of your accounts to make sure that you know what accounts have domain admin rights. Domain admin is the keys to the kingdom. So if they have access, if they have keys to the kingdom, they're going to be able to do anything on your network. Another big thing is you always want to maintain security accounts. You also want to use service accounts. That's another big thing. An example is when you implement Veeam, I would suggest that you use a service account for Veeam, and that is the only thing that service account is used for, just for Veeam. Another thing is you want to have an antivirus program that does block any scripts. So what we're seeing is we are seeing that these are running as PowerShell via API, and they're actually going in and running through your system. So if you have an algorithm-based antivirus program that is script blocking, we're not necessarily going to say that will stop every attack, but that'll be a good step in the right direction. You also want to make sure that your Veeam server is not on the domain. These programs go through and they can scan Active Directory. Basically, scan your Active Directory DNS to find any systems to reach out and see if they're accessible via CIF share and encrypt that data. So you want to make sure your Veeam server is not on the domain. Another thing that I've thought of while we're looking at this is you also don't want to name your Veeam server or your backup server. That is pretty obvious that if I'm a hacker trying to get into your infrastructure, the first thing I'm going to look for is anything with the word backup in it. And that's the first thing I'm going to kill. You also want to lock down PowerShell scripts via the script blocking on your antivirus programs. You also want to make sure that your endpoints are protected as well. Even those conference room PCs that you don't think that you don't really need to protect, you need to make sure endpoints are protected, user computers are protected. You want to make sure those conference room PCs, any kiosks, anything that can communicate in your network has a algorithm-based script blocking antivirus solution on it. And then we've already discussed the service accounts, and only use those for a specific purpose. As we mentioned, you want to make sure that your service account is only used for Veeam and the Veeam components within inside your infrastructure.
Yeah, those are good points. A couple of other things that we can do. We always talk about MFA or multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication. That's a pretty good way, even if your accounts are compromised, to provide another layer of access to say, okay, you have the password, but now give me another form of authentication, and that will prevent, that unwanted access. You talked a little bit about endpoints and what's called an EDR. It's the antivirus that you put on computers and endpoints. And, we call an endpoint anything that has an operating system on it, right? So it's not just the laptops and the desktops. It's the printers, the phones, the switches, the routers, firewalls, anything like that is basically an endpoint. And of course, the weakest link in any organization is the endpoint, typically because it has these things sitting there operating them. And I'm not just pointing at me, but it's just people in general are usually the weakest link. Now, we do things a little bit different, and we offer added protection here at Global Data Vault through a feature called Enhanced Data Protection. Can you tell us what that means and what it means for ransomware attacks that delete backups?
The enhanced data protection is actually a solution that we offer to give our customers that extra layer of security. And it basically stores the data where you cannot get to it outside of your repository. If you cannot access it, it cannot be deleted. So that is actually why to where you don't have access to it or you cannot see it in the Veeam console. So our last 4 attacks that we've had, the only thing that has saved these customers was the Global Data Vault Enhanced Data Protection solution. We were able to fast clone the data back into the customer's repository to give them the ability to restore the data from the cloud, and then also bring the customer up in an emergency situation and basically get them in a functioning state so that they can make payroll the next day, so that they could do their accounting, essentially run their business from the cloud while they are trying to mitigate the threat in their infrastructure.
Yeah, that's some pretty scary stuff. So to describe exactly what happened, the customer logs in, they say, I'm going to go check my backups. They look at the repository, their on-premises backup server, files are gone. They go to their cloud repository, files are gone. Can you imagine what that must feel like? Now they call us and Steven says, sure, we've got your data right here. I'll have it back in there, within a little bit of time. It's pretty valuable stuff. Can you talk us through patch management? And, we have a 24/7 SOC. Maybe not everybody does, but how that can benefit customers?
Yeah, so patch management is very critical to your protection because there are patches literally released every single week. We call it Patch Tuesday by Microsoft that addresses critical vulnerabilities in the software. Not only Microsoft, there's different software solutions that you may have in your infrastructure. They also release critical patches as well. So you need to make sure that you do have a good patch management solution in place, and that your servers and or endpoints are being patched on a weekly basis. You also want to make sure that you do have some sort of security in place. If you don't have access to a 24-hour SOC, you may have the ability to monitor your systems during the various monitoring programs that they have out there these days. But we would suggest that you have something that can watch your systems 24 hours. Be it a SOC, a network operations center, and or one of the monitoring softwares out there.
That's pretty important. What we've seen recently is, the users are calling us first thing in the morning, 6 a.m., something like that, saying, I think that we're getting hit by ransomware. We've seen it usually happen between like 2 in the morning and 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. So the attackers are timing this to when they probably rightly feel that there's not many people watching or that there's more time of success, right? So it's good to have that alerting system out there. When we talk about housekeeping, this isn't something that everybody likes. A lot of times we see policies and procedures, what we might call housekeeping, start off strong, and then over time you get complacent. And sort of like you do with your house, you first move into a house, keep it really clean for a while, and then over time you might not do the windows as often as you used to. And the same thing goes with your infrastructure and reviewing security items on here. One of the things that we like to ask people is to keep us in the loop about any kind of business continuity plan changes. Obviously, as a provider, it's important for us to understand, what your requirements are, what changes you've made for BCDR so that we can help you with that and we can recover you in the method that makes the most sense for your business. And that would include a quarterly review of your disaster recovery plan. And I'm talking about internally. Global Data Vault doesn't necessarily need to be involved in that unless there's significant changes or questions that you might have. But we do have a series and webinar on how to create DR plan and whatnot if you want to go check that out. Stephen, what about user education and security awareness programs? And just kind of walk us through the other bullet points down there.
So I cannot stress enough user education and security awareness. I would suggest that you have every user in your organization, all the way down to the janitors and security guards. Even if you have a cafeteria, the cafeteria workers, take your security awareness training quarterly. That way they know what to look for. They do know the spear phishing email attempts. Is this a true email? Make sure that they do go through the user education, security awareness. I would also suggest that you do find a program to test your users. There are several different programs out there that will send test spear phishing emails to everybody in your organization. I would suggest you do that, and if they will send you a report on who clicks the link. So that would be a good education moment to have those users who did click that link, maybe to attend some additional training on security awareness, maybe spam training. User education is going to be one of the keys to help prevent ransomware, because most of the attacks that we have seen were all generated from users clicking a link in the email or opening an attachment. The user education is very important. You also want to review any unauthorized systems and or user logs. The reason for that is if you review your firewall log and if you see your bunch of hits coming in from another country, another state, that could be a brute force attack attempt trying to gain access to your system. That is also why it's good to have a 24-hour SOC or network operations center. That way your firewall logs are continuously being monitored for these authorized attempts and what systems they're trying to access, to where they can go in and they can actually block any IPs that the attacks are coming from. You also want to check for non-standard systems and devices. I'm going to go back to the conference rooms, PCs, the kiosk, the cell phones, anything that access your network that is not on a guest network needs to have some sort of security on them. That way you know that Christy from accounting isn't connecting her iPhone where she just downloaded an attachment the other day from a strange email address and infecting your network. And then you also want to review any firewall rules and logs. Maybe you're getting an attack from a certain country. You want to put a global block on that. That's something that you would need to review your firewall logs. Another good thing is checking your domain controller, the security event viewer, making sure that you don't see any strange accounts that you do not recognize trying to log in over and over again.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention about preventative and good housekeeping is sometimes we fail to think about the easiest things, right? And this is where good security practices come into play. This is just a USB drive. But one thing that attackers have done in the past, and people still don't even think much about, is if I drop one of these outside your company's door around lunch break and it's got bad stuff on it, all I have to do is drop it outside the door and wait for somebody to pick it up. I guarantee you that 90% of the people that pick one of these things up, the first thing they're going to do is stick it in their computer to see what's on it, right? And by doing that, you just unleashed whatever is on this onto your network. Now, if you have USB access policies or, autoplay policies on that, that will help. But I wanted to mention, Stephen talked about the kiosks and the things that you forget about the computers. Don't forget about simple physical access devices as well. So what to do if you do get ransomware? We have to determine the scope of the attack and do what we can to reduce that. That's number one. That's where the EDR, the antivirus comes into play, shutting things down. The ability to automatically respond to that is important. Now, Stephen, this would be hard for it to do if it was just one person, right? Like if you and I were here and I'm like, okay, Stephen, you go call everybody and I'm going to sit here and panic. It'd be difficult, right? So what do you recommend?
So what I would recommend is I would delegate each of these tasks to an individual, and all these need to occur at the same time. You need to have one person determining the scope of attack. My suggestion would be to unplug your switches and your firewalls so that they can't communicate internally until you do determine that scope of attack. If the next thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to get with your CIO or your CISO to determine if you do have cyber insurance company, you're going to need to contact them immediately. The insurance companies are all the same, whether it be a car, whether it be cyber, whether it be home. They're going to want to know the scope of the damage, and they're not going to want you to repair anything until you determine the scope of the damage so that you can go ahead and get that claim started. You need to delegate somebody to contact your cyber insurance company. You obviously need to contact the authorities since it is a cyber threat. You do need to contact FBI, local law enforcement, tell them that you had a data breach, and you also need to contact your cybersecurity provider to let them know, hey, I just got hit by something. Please watch. They will also help you determine the entry point of the attack. Where did the attack come from? What system did it come from? I would suggest that you isolate that system once you determine it off your network completely. Unplug it. Turn it off. Don't even let it have access. The next thing is you want to contact your backup provider immediately. The reason for that is while you're contacting the other authorities and determining the scope of the attack, the backup provider needs to disable your account so that we can reduce the scope of damage on our side. Some people think that, well, you contact our backup provider after we do these other tasks, but all these need to pretty much go concurrent. And we need to know immediately so that we can go ahead and, first of all, disable access from your system. And then we need to go ahead and start working on a plan to get your systems online while your insurance company comes in and determines the scope of attack. Most of the time, they're going to request that you not touch anything in your infrastructure, including restoring your machine. So they normally request that you save a copy so that they can go ahead and complete their investigation. So that is why you need to contact your backup provider so we can work on getting the systems online to provide you access until we get a plan in place to go ahead and fill you back in your system once your infrastructure has been released.
Yeah, and part of all of that is the detection and analysis of the situation. And it's really difficult at the time of the attack or when you discover what's going on. It's really hard to figure out exactly what the cause is. Your SOC might be able to say it came from X device, but it may take a while to figure out what's going on. So you're going to want to figure out what was affected, who or what originated the event, how it's occurring, not only after the fact, but to also reduce the impact that it could have to other systems. Maybe it's somewhat contained for now. Maybe it only hit one of your offices and you have multiple offices. We need to determine who, what, where, when, and why, basically, so that we can eliminate, or that you can eliminate, further spread, as well as get information that the authorities might need, that the insurance company might need, and what you might need just to make your environment safer in the future. So, Stephen, we talk to the customers, like waiting on them to do things, and they're, trying to get all this stuff done. We've been a part of these conversations. So what do you see, when it comes to documenting the steps? What are the things that you remember?
Well, you just need to make sure that you document everything from the time the incident occurred all the way through the resolution. This is also a good step for any insurance claims that you need to file. Document how much downtime you've had, and document exactly what happened from the time this incident occurred, who was involved, employees were involved, who was handling what task, all the way to the final resolution, because most of these insurance policies do cover downtime, and you could possibly be compensated for that, but you would need to check your individual policy. You also want to make sure that you document what system is affected. I would assume everything is affected. Do not let anything go unscanned or untested. I would assume everything is affected. You also need to find the originating point of the incident, and you need to isolate that threat. Because what we've seen in the past is we have restored customer systems and they did not isolate the original threat. And as soon as we restored the data, it was infected again. So you need to isolate where the threat is coming into, find out how the incident is occurring, and you need to neutralize that before you start restoring. You also need to prioritize the handling of the incident. When you go down and you're affected by ransomware, this should be treated as a Sev 1 incident by your IT team. This is a priority. Your first goal is get your business up and functioning again. That should be the priority of getting your business into operation, back into operation so that you can process your payroll, so you can do your accounting, so you can bill your customers. But you do need to reach out to the people that we suggested prior to doing any of this so that you don't cause any issues whenever they go through it, they look at the information. So it's very important that you follow the processes, contact the authorities, contact your insurance company, and then prioritize handling of the incident by factors. The main goal of this is to get you up as quickly as possible and basically back as business as usual.
Yeah, Stephen, so you talked about containment a little bit, which is obviously the next step in a process where we're looking at potential damage, availability of services, et cetera. But there are other things in containment with the media, containment with your investors, containment with your employee resources, making sure that there's plans on what employees should not do, should not say, et cetera, while you continue to collect the evidence. We've seen some of the people that have gotten hit, like immediately switch antivirus providers, uninstall what they had and reinstall things sort of in process. There are times when that is good to try to find something that will detect and remediate the issue. But sometimes you could be shooting yourself in the foot because, again, you might be taking away some evidence or taking away something that can provide you insight. So just say be really careful when you start making changes like that. Obviously, containment, you do want to make sure that you have the virus or the malware, the ransomware, keep it from spreading any further. Just be aware that you could be introducing other issues into the environment. So let's talk about eradication. That's a big word for basically mean getting rid of it, right? So, Stephen, what could we do to eradicate virus or malware, ransomware from an environment?
The first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to identify all hosts that were affected within the organization. And at this point, if you've been exposed, assume everything is infected. Then you can go ahead and try to mitigate any vulnerabilities. I would suggest, I'm going to say this multiple times, once you work out with your cyber insurance company, then you can go ahead and work on mitigating any vulnerabilities that were existed. At this point, if your entire infrastructure is affected, I would suggest that you consider rebuilding those hosts. Most of these infections are time delayed. They've been on your system for months. It was triggered on certain conditions that applied in your infrastructure that triggered them. In the past, we've seen just an internet connection trigger these vulnerabilities to encrypt everything in your environment. Christy in accounting had an old laptop that she turned off in July. She switched to a new laptop. Right before she switched that laptop off, she clicked on a FedEx tracking number in her email, went to a strange site and downloaded a Java application. Her laptop is now infected. She powered that off because she switched to a new laptop. She turned it on because she forgot about a file. And as soon as it detects internet, your whole infrastructure is now infected. So that is just an example on what you need to look for, and you need to mitigate all the vulnerabilities. I would suggest rebuilding. If you can't rebuild, bring your backups up in a dev environment or that at least does not have outside access, and run those antivirus scans on all the system. Make sure that you run a script-based algorithm program there's several out there. There are several that are recommended, but work with your security operations center or your security team to find out a good antivirus program that can mitigate any vulnerabilities for any servers that were exposed. And then just make sure, like I said, assume everything is infected. So I would go ahead and also do this in a phased approach. You need to determine what your critical servers are, what your non-critical servers are. Create groups, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Get those done in a phased approach so you can get your most critical infrastructure online as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and part of that recovery process, is getting things back to normal. And it's not a quick process. You have to think about remediating issues and all of the steps that we've just talked about as a part of return to normal operations. And it can take time. Simply copying the files back down from a cloud provider can take time because it's just mechanical, limitations. But the important thing that Stephen mentioned is quite often that you have to rebuild everything from scratch. And even if you pay the ransom, right, we do see organizations pay the ransom because it's the only option they have. Their backups are gone. They can't access them. They can't restore anything. They simply have to pay the ransom. And the ransomware people are nice enough to say, have a good day. Here's your key. Thanks for shopping with us or, whatever. But If you don't rebuild that system, there's a chance that they're going to come back. And we like to refer to this as the ATM. You become an ATM for those hackers because when their funds run low, they'll simply go back down their list of people who they've hit, who paid the ransom, and hit you again. And at that point, if you haven't remediated, if you haven't gone to a cloud-based solution with enhanced data protection like us, you may not be able to recover again, and you'll just end up paying the ransom again. So you always want to make sure that you're remediating issues and recovering appropriately, as well as implementing any type of additional monitoring recovery tools that are necessary. Anything else to add to that, Stephen?
Just basically what you need to do is you need to make sure that you have user training, you need to have a good security program in place, and you need to have monitoring.
Yeah. We've got a bunch of free resources available. Obviously, we have a DR plan template there. We have some previous webinars on patching the DR plans, what insider threats are. If you're not familiar with insider threats, then I would recommend that you go watch that one because it's not just the people. It's not, the threats aren't coming from outside. They could be coming from inside. It could be time bombs. It could be a whole lot of different things that are impacting your environment. The key here is that Global Data Vault provides a unique solution to protect data and companies from against just that activity. We've seen it happen. It happens all the time. And like Stephen said, we were able to recover that because we were protecting the data in ways that prevented the ransomware from accessing it, and customers were able to get back up and running more quickly. So we talked about, Stephen, it's not a matter if, but when. Preparation is a key for fast recovery. Don't set it and forget it. Keep reviewing those policies. Go back and make sure everything's up to date. Maintain your good housekeeping and be adaptable. What, Stephen, as far as being adaptable, like technology is always changing. So what things might we think about in the future when it comes to ransomware? Just dream up something that'll probably happen, right?
Yeah, so you always want to make sure that you're up to date on the latest technologies, especially your security team, to make sure that they are prepared for any attacks. Because ransomware and or these threats are changing as technology advances. So you want to make sure that your security team is up to date on the new attacks and have them go through the new training. Also, you want to see maybe if your security team can do your pen testing, your penetration testing on your infrastructure. Find out where the holes are or the gaps are before an attacker does.
Yeah, that is a really good point. And maybe you want to have a third party do that because your internal tools may not be sophisticated enough. They may be used to your environment, right? You may not want the truth. So sometimes having a third party do that for your organization is beneficial as well. So what we do, Global Data Vault, as a data prize company, we're a fully managed backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service, Office 365 backup provider. We support VMware, Hyper-V, Acronis, physical servers, basically what we find in most environments today. And we do that based on the understanding of quality of data is what's most important. So not only will we tell you, yes, your backups are successful, your replicated VMs are successful, but we keep you within SLA. We'll monitor when your last backup file was, when your last replication was, and judge that against the SLAs we have in place and report that back to you. So in the event of ransomware, you know that as of this morning, my last backup was 4 hours ago. That's when I can recover to and everything's good. So I think I'll turn it back over to Trista to see if we have any questions.
Oh, I don't see any questions in chat. So just a couple of things in case somebody gets brave and wants to shoot something over there. I wanted to thank you both for all that great knowledge. We did put in chat the links to the ransomware checklist and the link to our DR planning template. So those are really good resources that I'm sure you'll want to grab. Here we go. Is EDP something that's included with the Global Data Vault service? We talked about enhanced data protection earlier and how that's sort of our secret sauce.
Enhanced data protection is included by default. There's no upcharge for it as a new customer. If you're an existing customer and you don't have it, contact us. We'll be happy to get you some info on that. But it is enabled and available by default to every new customer.
Okay, well, I don't see any other questions, so you guys must have done just an incredible job covering everything. So I think we're going to wrap it up for today. We appreciate you being here. We're still planning our 2022 webinar calendars, so there's lots of opportunity. If you want to make a suggestion for one of our upcoming webinars, we would love to hear what you would like to learn about. So feel free to reach out to either one of our presenters or myself. And as we mentioned before, you can find all of our previous webinars at globaldatavault.com/webinars. And you can also register there to be notified for all of our upcoming webinars, or simply follow us on social, any of the channels at Global Data Vault. Thank you again for coming.
Thanks for the time.